Hey, it's Chris Schmidt with the Average Joe Sports Show, and we're going to go around the horn.
Hi, everybody. It's Bill Doleman. Who's in for the Sweet 16 with me?
Mitch Sherman here. Matt Rule and his football coaches are back out on the road this week around the state of Nebraska.
It's Elijah Herbel here. Let's also hit Husker Baseball. They got it started off down in Texas last weekend. They're in Arizona this weekend. What did we see last weekend? What do we want to see this weekend?
Welcome into episode
31.
The Average Joe Sports Show. Mitch Sherman, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. Be sure to find and follow us Spotify and iTunes for the podcast, and as always, the YouTube channel, the AJ Sports Show. Find us and follow us on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. Guys, you have your dancing shoes on. Doleman, can you cut a rug?
I've had them on for weeks. I've got plans for the Sweet 16. Come on.
Ooh.
That's all they needed to do last night was get one road win. I mean, everybody's waiting to put Nebraska in the bracket. And this weekend, when college basketball dominates the airwaves, all those media folks who justifiably like Fred Hoiberg and have been cheering for him, I think now that they say that the Huskers have the road win and winning at Indiana, regardless of how bad they are, it still kind of looks good that you beat.
They shouldn't be bad.
Right. But they won at Indiana, and it's a 15-point win. And I think the conversation about Nebraska will be that that's a team that is firmly in the tournament, provided they don't do something stupid at home in the next couple of weeks.
Well,
should we be talking about Fred Hoiberg as the Big Ten Coach of the Year? I mean, he's about to get to 20 wins. The next win, you're looking at 10 conference wins. This is if Nebraska takes care of business on Sunday against Minnesota, with 3 to play. I mean, potentially a top 4 seed in the tournament. You going to give it to Matt Painter? I mean, you're going to give it to Greg Gard? No.
Underwood's out. I mean, he's got talent.
Collins has to be the only other candidate.
Yeah, well, he just won it.
And that's the thing. So I look at Matt Painter at Purdue, who's currently top of standings. Let's just go through the standings, because I don't think you need to include anyone below Nebraska in the standings, just with how the Big Ten is this year. No offense to those schools, but I'm just being real here. Look at Painter. Congrats. You're the top team in the Big Ten with the reigning AP National Player of the Year. Congrats. You've done a bang-up job, but you kind of lose out just based on that. Like,
you've done your job.
You have the Player of the Year. Awesome. You've done what you should. You look at Illinois and Underwood, maybe a candidate, but also not really. Like, I don't think he's gone above and beyond with that squad. It's a talented squad, and it really has helped Illinois that they got Shannon back, regardless of what you think with his legal situation. That's helped that team, but you don't really put that on Underwood. Then you get to Wisconsin and Gard, and again, with how this end of the season's gone for Wisconsin, I don't think you put him in contention for Big Ten Coach of the Year. Collins won it last year at Northwestern, so I think they'd be hesitant to give it out twice. And then you get to Nebraska and Hoiberg. Not only is Hoiberg universally well-liked by the people who are going to be voting on this, but he's done a good job. It's the best season he's had at Nebraska. I mean, nobody's been able to come into Pinnacle Bank Arena and beat Nebraska. Right now, it feels like Hoiberg's a shoo-in to me to go win this. I mean, you get below Nebraska, and you get to Michigan State, and, like...
They're preseason number 4.
And so with that in mind, they've almost underachieved. I guess he's done a good job to bring that squad back together and get them into the NCAA tournament after some times early in the Big Ten slate where you thought maybe Michigan State's just going to be completely out of things. I guess he's done a good job to rein them in, but below that, I don't even think you need to list any teams. It seems to me that
Minnesota's coach might have an argument if they.
Yeah, you're right.
Stay hot.
No longer Patino. What's?
Nobody can even name the Minnesota coach.
Is it Smith? Is it Smith?
Johnson.
It's Ben Johnson.
Ben Johnson.
I had to popular last name.
Yeah, so you can count him off the list based on that alone. It's got to be Hoiberg, right?
I think he's the favorite. I think Vegas has got him as the favorite right now in the ever popular odds for Big Ten Coach of the Year, which I have not laid eyes on. But
let's go to the War Horse, gentlemen.
Can we bet on that, Mitch, in Lincoln?
I think you can bet on anything you want.
I'll look it up for you.
Yeah, I mean, consider that there's still 20% of the conference season to go. You got 4 games, so it's not sealed and done yet, but I like his chances. And I think that as we go down the stretch here in these last 4 games starts to become one of the storylines for Nebraska basketball, is the job that Fred Hoiberg has done in building the program to this place where they're going to end up with 20-plus wins and seemingly just their second NCAA tournament berth in the past quarter century. Look at where this program was after his first 2 years. And he was left for dead. The program was left for dead. It looked like Nebraska had made a faulty hire to go along with the faulty hire that it made in football several months before. And all Fred Hoiberg has done since that point is build Nebraska up step by step by step over the last 3 years to get to a place now where they're a solid upper division Big Ten team. And the Big Ten this is not the Big Ten from the year that Nebraska earned a 4 seed and didn't get into the NCAA tournament with double-digit conference wins. This is a Big Ten that has actually turned out to be a good conference and is in the conversation with the Big East as the best college basketball conference in the country this year. And there's Nebraska sitting in the top 5.
Incredible turn of events, Mitch, to what you've kind of highlighted, how it started, how it's going from Fred Hoiberg, how he reassessed, how he kind of redefined not only his coaching staff, but just who he recruited and who he brought in from the portal. Because he's put guys into the NBA, but that didn't necessarily jibe chemistry-wise. But he's got guys that fit. And I look at Gary. I mean, Gary's a prime example. You look at how good Alabama is this year. You get a guy that wasn't quite ready to crack the starting lineup. He's your heart and soul. He's your barometer. And then the guts to even put your family in the middle of this with your son, Sam. Sam's been a monster spark. Doesn't care if he scores or not, but he's a difference maker. And he was last night in Bloomington with just some steals and a couple of free throws. But no, they're maddening to watch, unfortunately. But they're also pretty fun to watch in PBA. And I hope for Fred's sake they close this thing out without a loss going to Indy.
Well, they got a sellout Sunday that they've announced against the Gophers. So I'd expect that the atmosphere is going to be really good. It's a Sunday night, but what's better? What's worse? A Sunday night or a Saturday morning like we had against Penn State at PBA last week. And that was, I didn't feel, I was at that game and I didn't feel like things were at any point
jumping.
No, it was not. It was like, let's roll out of bed and play some hoops. So,
it was sleepy.
Credit to Nebraska, because Nebraska was sleepy too, but they came out and got the job done and ended up winning by 20 points. So against a Penn State team that turned around and goes and beats Illinois. So you never know what you're going to get in this Big Ten. And I think that's why the Big Ten has turned out to be a good conference this year, because you have a team like Penn State or a team like Minnesota that can jump up and bite you at any point. And you have a Nebraska and a Northwestern that maybe weren't expected to be in the top 5 in the league, or probably were not, ahead of Michigan State. I mean, it's unfathomable that the teams at the bottom are Indiana and Michigan. Rutgers may be down there too, but just the fact that some of these programs with great history are not holding up their end of the deal, and the Big Ten is still having a pretty good season as a conference is impressive. So, I hope for Nebraska's sake that it can be a fun and raucous final 2 games against Minnesota and longtime rival Rutgers at PBA over the next couple
need it. You'll need it for both.
Guys, I've been doing some.
I think the fact that Michigan, Ohio State, and Indiana are having really, really down years. Not everybody has the perception that the Big Ten is as competitive as it has been. And I think when you take a look at the league overall, it's pretty good. It's pretty competitive, especially trying to win on the road, right? But when you see Juwan Howard, big name, Mike Woodson, big name, and Chris Holtzman's not a big name, but it's still Ohio State, that there's a perception that maybe this might be a down year, and that's why Nebraska has risen to where it is, or why Northwestern is where it is. But I tend to agree with you. I think there's more depth to this league than maybe the national media is giving it credit because there's so much on the Big East. The SEC is always going to get headlines, just because it's the SEC. The Mountain West has certainly had a fantastic year, but I like the depth of the conference and how tough it is to win on the road, and Nebraska's certainly proven that. But I think that this has been a formidable conference to this point anyway. Now, Nebraska can't afford to stumble against Michigan, of all things, that's still waiting down the road, on the road. That would be an awful way to go into the tournament, the Big Ten tournament, especially if you have a chance to get a double bye.
Guys, I've been doing some research here while we've been chatting. Nebraska's odds to make the NCAA tournament, according to Vegas, they're minus 360, which I believe puts them at 1 to 3.6. So you need to put down $360 to win $100, which means it is more than likely. I was not able to find a Big Ten Coach of the Year odds for our gamblers here locally, so apologies for that. The line's not available, but I did find
it's shocking.
Nebraska 36-1 to make the Final Four. So a $100 bet will net you $3,600 if Nebraska does in fact make it to that Final Four. Easier.
Are we all chipping in $250?
No.
Mitch is like, no.
I don't feel like throwing away $250.
What are Creighton's odds to make the Final Four? Just curious.
Oh, I shouldn't have closed out of that page. Give me a second.
Oh, you don't need to. And we're not
70-some percent. We were talking with our dear friend Brandon Vogel earlier today, and Nebraska right now at 70% to get in as we speak. There's still 4 games left. Mitch, to your thought, but I think what's important about last night, not only getting that first road win, right, checking the old resume, but how they won it, because it was pucker time, man. It was TVs are broken or about to be broken, remotes were being thrown, people were reaching for the whiskey, and you blew a 22-point lead. They looked great, and then they found a way to respond on a 14-2 run. And Rink didn't do much scoring wise, but you had other guys step up. Jamarcus Lawrence was great, and Fred. That's 3 games that he kind of tweaked what he was doing with Jamarcus. I mean, you've seen development from guys, but you've seen them accept their roles and thrive. They've got a new star or superhero. It feels like every night. You've had 3 or 4 guys go off in big games and carry the team, which is rare.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think you spelled it out nicely, Schmidt, when you started talking about this team, and the first guy out of your mouth was Juwan Gary and how he's the barometer for this group. And then the next guy that you mentioned, and I know you weren't going in order of importance, but it was Sam Hoiberg. And it's on any day, in any part of any game, it could be Hoiberg, it could be Jamarcus Lawrence, as we saw last night. It could be Bryce Williams. It could be Rink Mast. It could be Josiah Alec coming up huge, hitting a 3, getting an offensive rebound, whatever. He didn't hit a lot of 3s, but he hit a big one in that game last night. They are very, very nicely balanced. I didn't even say Keisei Tominaga, who can go on heaters and hit back to back to back. I thought Kent Pavelka's ears were going to come off of the side of his head from the sounds of it on the third triple in a span of 30 seconds that Tominaga hit in the first half. So I'll tell you my experience in watching the game last night, which is every Wednesday night this time of year, is I was pitching batting practice to the 13-year-olds out in Elkhorn, and so that's why I heard Kent on the way out to the game. I'm in my car, and then I was in the facility, and I had the game, kind of in my phone, holding it, watching it as I'm throwing with one hand and holding the phone in the other behind the screen. These kids hit 70-mile-an-hour line drives back at me now, so there's no way I'm standing out there without a screen. I don't want to break my phone or break my face or whatever trying to watch a basketball game and multitask. But with Nebraska up 20 at halftime, I said, all right, guys, I can focus entirely on you right now. I don't need to worry about this game. I'm going to put the phone away. And I turned it back on, and it wasn't all the way to 3 points yet. But I'm like, what am I watching here? This is a completely different game. And, of course, I think like everybody else, when it got down to 3 points at the under 8 timeout, I thought, here we go. This is another one of these collapses on the road for Nebraska that we've just gotten all too accustomed to. And for them to pull it out and win the way that they did, it really does say something, I think, about the mentality that this team has and the toughness that Fred Hoiberg has talked about. We haven't seen that toughness on the road, save for the Kansas State game, but we saw it last night.
Well, let me throw this question out there for you guys. Do you think that the way in which that second half went for Nebraska last night, where it was pucker factors, all of Nebraska clinched in their living room watching that second half and watching what felt like a monumental Nebraska collapse, do you think that meant more this Husker basketball team and what we know about this team than if they would have coasted to a 20-point victory? The fact that they did have to face that adversity, and Assembly Hall, after a lot of booing of the home team, did eventually get behind their team and make things difficult on Nebraska. I feel like because the game went like that, not only did we learn more about this Husker basketball team, I think it was a big moment for this Husker basketball team to learn some things about themselves as the regular season winds down and we get ready for postseason play.
I think what was significant was the final margin of victory in that regard. If they had won by 3, would have been a very nice win. But they survived the 22-point collapse. I guess would have been 19-point collapse because they got to within 3. And if they had battled the rest of the way and somehow eke out a win, given the way the first half had gone, but then to hang on and win, I think there would have been a lot of question marks as to whether or not that was a quality win. But then to get to within 3, as Indiana did, and then Hoiberg makes that underappreciated steal. They got an offensive rebound, and he just goes in and steals it and goes the other way. They had to 3, I think, on that transition. And as quick as it seemed like they got down to 3 points, it was back up to 12. And I think that play was the spark, really. But if Nebraska had a 22-point lead, survives and wins it by 3 or 4 points, okay, they finally got the win, but there's a lot of question marks. But to come back and then to win it by 15, I mean, that to me was significant to watch. But when they start to just look at resumes in a couple of weeks, it's going to be a 15-point road win. It's not going to really matter as to how they did it. It's going to say they won on the road in Indiana by 15. But yes, in the microcosm of that, looking at it, the resiliency, the fight back, and again, that it was somebody else, because we saw that stretch where it was masked. Alec had a career game. CJ Wilcher, as hot as he was 5 weeks ago, about 2-3 weeks ago,
Wisconsin.
He's been that cold ever since then. And he was the one who carried him for a while. And, everybody's talking about him as the clear-cut 6th man of the year in the Big Ten, and he might be. And I want to go back on Tominaga, and I mentioned this to Schmidt, too. Tominaga went into a slump, and it was right after his folks were here, and then they left. And, I'm not a Hallmark kind of guy, but there might have been something to a little homesickness that, mom and dad are here. His time at Nebraska is going to be winding down. Sure, he's going to be going back probably to a pro career overseas and will be a hometown hero. I just wonder if there wasn't something to that he played so well while they were here like he has the last 2 years. They leave. It just kind of got to him a little bit. But he's come back in the last 2 weeks, and as Wilcher has diminished, Tominaga's been back to being the player that Nebraska, has come accustomed to and fallen in love with.
You think he got some home cooking while mom and dad were in town? They brought some of the Japanese cuisine over and filled him up, and he was feeling good. And then they leave, and he's back to eating, who knows what, Jimmy John's and
right,
I think if I'm a committee member, and you kind of touched on this, Bill, but if I'm on the selection committee and these guys and gals are watching games nightly, especially at this time of year when they're about to go into sequester mode and start to map out the field. And I see that, it means more. I remember that more in March, and I have a little bit more of a respect and understanding of what Nebraska is as a team than I would if they get to that 20-point lead at halftime and then just coast to a victory. Even if it's a bigger margin, even if it's 20, if Indiana just plays them even and it's a nothing ho-hum, boring second half at Assembly Hall, I that doesn't have as much of an impact on me as a person who's selecting the field than it does to see them have to basically win that game twice on the same night on the road at Indiana. So I think where that game helps them is in the tournament. Where it helps them more to have gone through that, it's in the, because that's when teams are playing. That's when their lives are on the line. Their basketball lives are on the line, and that's when the teams are desperate. And you see comebacks like that every day in the tournament, where a team gets down big and the next thing you know, there's a huge run and it's a one possession game. So if Nebraska gets in the tournament, presumably it will, and it finds itself in some kind of desperation mode, either on the plus side or the downside, I think they can rely on that experience from Wednesday night, and it'll help them in their bid to get the first win in school history in March.
It's a lasting impression, to your point, with the committee. And yeah, they had to kind of go through hell here and survive it. And they survived it, and then they finished it out the right way, strong with that 15-point cover. I mean, they were dogged, and then they were favored by 2 points by the air quote experts in the desert. And no, they can put that in their back pocket. I mean, that's what was lacking. That's what has kind of been in the back of their mind, fellas, with Rutgers and with Minnesota. That here we go again, PTSD type thing.
Well, and that's kind of the question becomes to me here over the next couple of games is this just one road win? You can add it to the resume. You're good. You've checked that box. You didn't go winless on the road in conference. Or is this a monkey off the back type win for this Husker basketball team where they can go out there and play more freely? Because it's not the most brutal close to the season in terms of the road opponents that they're going to face. Realistically, this Husker basketball team, I think, is good enough to close the season 4-0 in their last 4 games. Can they do that? It's another question altogether. But when you just look at the talent and the way that this team has played all year long, if you can bridge the gap between the road and the home and get a little more consistency with those road games, I think it's reasonable to think this team could go 4-0. It's a big if to see if they're going to bridge that gap, or maybe it was just, you know what, the Indiana crowd is booing the home team. It makes things a little bit easier for us on the road, and thank God for it, because now we're not going to be the team that's fighting for our NCAA tournament lives with 0 road wins. It's a question going forward, but it's really the last remaining question to me with this Husker basketball team is can they bridge that gap between road and home? Can they figure that out before postseason time? And now whenever you're going and playing only on neutral courts, which feels like a half road game every single time, do you have more confidence going into an environment like that?
But what the problem that they have with the last 4 games, and I agree, they're all winnable, but you've got Minnesota and Rutgers. Now they're 2 teams that are more so in that bubble conversation than Nebraska is right now. So if they come to Lincoln and beat Nebraska, they're playing for their tournament resume. And for them, beating Nebraska and Lincoln is all of a sudden maybe the goldest star on their resume. I mean, Nebraska is now the hunted to a certain extent, which is shocking to even think about. But that's a dangerous game against Minnesota and Rutgers, right? But Nebraska should have beaten both of those teams on the road. Lost the Minnesota game twice, if you will. They had a pair of 12-point leads, or no, that was the game that they dominated the first half and lost, right? And then they had two 12-point leads at Rutgers and lost those. But those 2 teams are fighting for their resumes, and winning at Nebraska will be a big lift to them if they can get it done. Then they've got 2 wounded teams that are probably right now in the coaches search category. You can't ill afford to lose either one of those games if you're Nebraska. So I'm not going to say they're going to go 0-4, but Nebraska is certainly
good. I'm glad you're not predicting that.
Yeah, I've still got them in the Sweet 16, but you know, I think I look at Minnesota and Rutgers as 2 teams thinking, we would really enhance our resumes if we can knock off Nebraska and Lincoln.
And how weird is that? The thought that a win against Nebraska after what we've seen the past couple of years is a big mark on your resume for these opposing teams. That's a different weird thing to wrap my head around. But to play devil's advocate with you for a second, Bill, and I think you're right, but to play devil's advocate, you look at what this season has been in the Big Ten. Like Nebraska, in terms of teams that are in the top of the conference, Nebraska at home is up there with Northwestern and Purdue and Illinois, the who's who of the conference in terms of how well they play at home. Those two teams are going to have to throw a big punch to knock Nebraska down on the home floor. That's how well Nebraska is playing at home. It's not that they're one of the better teams in the conference. I think you could argue Nebraska on their home floor is the best team in the conference. No one's beaten them yet. And when you look at Rutgers, you look at Minnesota, they've already gotten Nebraska once. This is a payback opportunity for Nebraska on the home floor.
Agree.
A chance to show the selection committee, you know what? I know we lost on the road, but we're the better team. We're going to go prove it at Pinnacle Bank Arena. I don't worry about the motivation factor for Nebraska, so I don't worry about the quote-unquote trap games of sorts. Obviously, with Husker PTSD, it's always going to be in the back of your mind, oh, Nebraska's going to blow it. But this team feels a little different in that regard, and I think they're going to have added motivation for their two remaining home games because they've already lost to these teams, and I think they want to show the selection committee, the fans, whoever, that, you know what, we're better than what we showed on the road 2 months ago. We're going to go out there and win it today. That's what type of team Nebraska has right now. Now, do they go out and actually succeed, accomplish their goals, and get the final 2 home wins to maintain a perfect home record? We shall see. But the way I see it right now, I feel better about that than I do about them dropping one of those 2 games or both of them.
They had an edge. They had an edge last night at Indiana. They had the same edge at Illinois. They got to keep that edge moving forward. Mitch Sherman, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. The Average Joe Sports Show, episode 33, Spotify and iTunes, where you can download the show. The AJ Sports Pod is where you can find the show on Twitter. The AJ Sports Show, as we can all point and laugh, is where you find us on YouTube. I was going to football, fellas, from basketball.
Real quick on Nebraska basketball, though. The other problem that Nebraska has, and it's the same thing for a lot of other teams that have been in that bubble conversation, is what will happen when automatic bids are earned. Mm-hmm. You know, how many of those conferences where somebody has dominated the Colonial Athletic or the MEAC or whatever, and then somebody takes a flyer and they win the conference tournament, and somehow the resume is good enough for the regular season champion that it might also get in and steal a bid in that regard. That's a danger for everybody.
And that's what I think we said a couple months ago, that the big trump card that Nebraska has over those 2 teams is those teams haven't beaten Purdue. Those teams haven't beaten a national number 1 seed. I think it's really difficult for a selection committee to put, and I don't mean any offense by this, a mid-major that by all accounts has a strong resume. It's hard to put them in over a team that has beaten a national number 1 seed.
Yeah, and it's fully in Nebraska's hands to take that potential problem out of the equation.
Right.
All Nebraska has to do is win the games where it's the better team, and it doesn't matter who wins any tournament anywhere in the country. They're going to be just fine on Selection Sunday. But it could certainly get to that point. There are scenarios out there where it could get to the point that they'd have to sweat it out based on what happens in the Colonial Athletic League.
I've already got them in the Sweet 16. I'm just saying you have to talk about that scenario.
Well, not only Sweet 16, but just put him in Omaha, right, Bill? We can all crash over at Uncle Mitch's.
But quietly here, I just got one more point to make. Implications at the end of the season for Nebraska, if you're talking about motivation, really fast. I wanted to throw this in, couldn't really find a spot for it, so I'm going to throw it in now. Nebraska still has an outside chance. They need some help, but an outside chance at finishing number 2 in the regular season Big Ten standings. You need a lot of help from Illinois and from Wisconsin and from Northwestern, the 3 teams ahead of you, but it's still there. I just thought I'd throw that out there. It's still there. It's still a possibility. I
just had an idea. If Nebraska does make it to Omaha for the first 2 rounds, you guys can't stay here because I'm putting my house on Airbnb.
Oh,
and,
you're money.
And I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna leave the state, or at least my neighborhood, and clean up that week.
Well noted.
Well played, Mitch. Mitch is in the corner of his bar because he wants to be, is where he's coming from. Bill's in his
all it is,
football
Mitch,
office.
it's all about selling it an Airbnb with an in-home bartender. You just stay behind the bar while you rent that place out. You're just making drinks for folks. I'm sure they won't trash your house. Sounds like a great idea.
I won't even have to move. I can just be right where I am right here, taking deposits to you guys and making drinks and making money on Airbnb. Actually, Nebraska in Omaha is probably the worst case scenario for me to Airbnb my house, since all the people coming to the game would live here.
Iowa State.
I'm completely wrong on that. It's like if Kansas is coming to Omaha, that's when I need to start looking at the arrangements.
Yeah, that'd be good. A little old Big 8/Big 12 flavor to football, as the Lincoln Football Coaches Association had their clinic midweek. Mitch, I know you heard about that. We talked to Coach Mark Waller about that, as well as Waller and Coach Hansen have done a nice job for years bringing in so many different speaking guests to talk to high school coaches. And also the Omaha coaches got a chance for a little Husker flavor. Give us a little peek into what went on Wednesday.
Yeah, usually these nights are two separate Wednesdays in February, but the high school coaches were kind to the Nebraska coaches, or maybe they were just kind to their own spouses, their own loved ones, and they didn't want to schedule it on Valentine's Day a week ago Wednesday. They couldn't schedule it the previous Wednesday because the Nebraska coaches were finishing up their signing day activities. So we get to February 21st, and you don't really want to go much farther, because this is traditionally the time to have these events where the Nebraska football coaches come in and have pizza, drink beer, just talk football for several hours into the night. The Lincoln event, they opened the doors at 6:15, and it was 11 o'clock or close to it when everybody was out of there. And the Nebraska coaches were around. They stuck around for most of the thing. So because both events were held on the same night, a rarity, you had 5 of the Nebraska assistant coaches in Lincoln, and you had 5 of the Nebraska football assistant coaches in Omaha, and Matt Rule went to both places. Matt Rule started in Lincoln. He introduced Glenn Thomas and Evan Cooper and the other coaches who were there. Those are the 2 who presented to the high school coaches. They seat 70 people in the room out at Sandhills where they hold this event each year. And there were more than 100 coaches in that room. So standing room only, people on the lined up against the back of the walls to hear. It was the largest crowd they've had in 9 years of hosting this event. And Rule was there at the beginning. Then he got on the interstate, got up to Omaha, and hung out with those Metro coaches for a while, and took care of both events on the same night. So needless to say, they got rave reviews. The Nebraska coaches did, from the high school coaches who were in attendance, and they continue to earn gold stars from the guys who coach high school football in the state of Nebraska and the eastern part of the state of Nebraska in particular with what they did on Wednesday night.
And could Matt Rule
the interstate? He didn't get on OOU Chopper 1.
This is what I was going to say. Could
he might have been in a chopper?
Could Matt Rule be the push that the state of Nebraska needs to get a high-speed rail system set up between Lincoln and Omaha? If he can pull that off, just build a statue already.
Yeah. What did they call it? The swag copter that Kevin Sumlin used to fly around in Texas when he was the A&M coach.
He didn't get any glowing reviews from Johnny Football this week, did he? With Shannon Sharp.
No, Johnny was in the news. You're right. Johnny missed Johnny's parents missed their mark by a few years, and not having Johnny play in the NIL era, although seemingly it didn't matter because the cash was still flowing just fine. But he may have taken a helicopter, Elijah, for all I know. I was you don't want to assume anything. For all I know, he flew in Husker Airlines from Lincoln to Omaha.
That'd be like a Taylor Swift flight. That's what that is. A Taylor Swift flight, 15 minutes from one side of the city to the other.
Mm-hmm. But that's significant that effort is being made. And to hear you say that's the largest crowd in 9 years, You would think that thing, back in the day was maxed out, and
I think it's just a matter of capacity in the room.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that's a really big deal. And to make sure that the new guy is introduced and that he's at both places. I mean, the relationship building that they've done with the coaches in this state, we talked about Ed Foley, making the trip to every tavern in every small town in Nebraska as being important to get the communities rallied around. But, with the talent that has emerged in the state of Nebraska, and as coveted as it appears to be by programs around the country, of course, when national networks say, well, there's no talent in Nebraska, and, how can Matt Rule rebuild Nebraska? It's pretty clear that there are some really, really coveted players by Georgia, Alabama, Notre Dame, as we're finding out. And when you get those coaches saying, we're in, we are OOU, and I think that's a really big deal when the best players in the state are staying because their coaches think that's what's best.
Yeah, I think it's strategic that Tony White was part of the delegation that went to Omaha this week. You want to have him in front of those coaches at Omaha West Side as much as you possibly can because of Christian Jones, who's the next guy to be recruited by Georgia and Alabama and Notre Dame. 1 year after Carter Nelson received all of that recruiting attention in the 2024 class.
Mitch, I got a question for you, and Bill wants your take, Elijah as well. But let's kind of stay on the topic of coaches and outreach and not taking Nebraska for granted because this staff isn't. They're putting the work in. That said, what's your guys' feel? And Nebraska's done okay recently under Rule and even a little bit under Frost in keeping some of the Nebraska kids home. You can't keep everybody, or at least you couldn't. It may be a little bit different now with NIL walk-on opportunities, but the point is we've already discussed in past episodes about the infiltration from some of the blue bloods, that they are finding their way into Omaha, Lincoln, different parts of the state. Thank you. I was searching. I was thinking of Mitch Sherman with cowboy boots and the old general store there in Ainsworth.
I haven't been there. I haven't been there. It's a black mark on my reporting resume, but maybe
you haven't been there.
Carter's graduation. That's what I'm waiting for that.
You haven't been there yet. But just. It's been noticed for sure, but just as far as the playing catch-up ball, right? How's it gone right now? What's the perception and reception like? I mean, what's the headway made so far by Nebraska in state, and how much repairs needed to be done?
Well, Rule in the two classes that he signed has done a fantastic job in the state of Nebraska, especially with this most recent class because of all of the attention that Carter Nelson out in Ainsworth received. But not just that, for Nebraska to do the job that it did at Bellevue West in landing 3 prospects, for Nebraska to do the job that it did at Omaha West Side in finding Jalen Lloyd and making sure that Tristan Alvano was somebody who was part of this class. You're talking about 2 players from that state championship team who started for Nebraska as true freshmen in the 2023 season. I mean, we can go down the list and talk about all the players that Nebraska signed and have a conversation for 15 minutes. They really haven't missed out on all of that much, with the exception of the tight end from Pierce, who went to Iowa State.
Bramer.
Ben Bramer. Yes, I'm sorry. I had a mind numbing event there for a second, but Bramer's a big time player. I mean, he's going to be an all Big 12 tight end or maybe an All-American tight end by the time he's done. That's one they missed out on, but it was for no lack of effort. So they've put in the work. This staff from day one, spearheaded by Ed Foley, and he's the ground force. And then, Rule is like the air support who comes in and does the home visits and takes the jet out to the western part of the state. It's gone extremely well. It's not something that people should take for granted, because there's programs that are much more successful than Nebraska in recent times that have a difficult time locking down their home states. And, it's not the end all be all for a program to be relevant on the national level. You don't have to recruit your home state well, but for Nebraska and for most programs, it's high on the list of priorities. It certainly has been for Rule and his staff.
I can look back in history, and you could think of like the one or two or three that got away, and you could name them, and that was it. Larry Station went to Iowa. Sean Ridley went to Iowa. There was a running back from, I think, Omaha Central, a good one.
Sayers, I think it might have been.
No, that's way back. Gale Sayers went to Kansas. But, I think there was a running back at Omaha Central that went to Iowa State. But you could really just name the one or two every 5 years that escaped Nebraska. And if you go back to the last two classes, now Bramer, they got in on him late because they were hired in November, and there was already relationships, that had been developed with Iowa State. So it was kind of understandable. He gave Nebraska a look, but the relationship was there. So it's kind of understandable. But you look at that, okay, Bramer goes to Iowa State. This last class.
Talk about Zane Flores,
that's another one.
Same kind of a deal, just not for the lack of trying.
Yeah, and then Rezak in this class goes to Notre Dame. Well, out of the top 7 players, one got away, and it's if one, maybe two slips away, that's going to happen. That's kind of a number
not a bad thing.
Too.
That's
right.
Yeah. What was acceptable and expected in 1994 is different in 2024. These players today, it goes without saying, are much more aware of everything that's going on around them in the world. Social media's changed the game. NIL's changed the game. So if you expected to go and take the success of the team out of the equation, obviously Nebraska was a much more winning program 30 years ago than it is today. Take that out of the equation and just base your opinion solely on the job that the coaches are doing and the decisions that the players are making. It's doubly as difficult now, I would say, to recruit in-state players as it was 30 years ago, because they are just more worldly. That's how it works. And you can watch every game on TV, that's just a starting point. So these guys have to work hard. And again, I'll just say it shouldn't be taken for granted what they're doing, and that that part of what they're doing is having nights like Wednesday night this week in the state, so they can get into the back pockets and good graces of high school coaches in Nebraska.
Well, when you think about the one that got away, think about how different Mike Riley's tenure is at Nebraska if he doesn't let Elijah Herbel get away and go off to journalism school and get into radio. Completely different. That's a 4-year starter right there.
I was thinking Noah Fant, but good for you inserting yourself into the
hip hooray.
Drew Ott, Avante Dickerson, but no, we're going with Herbel.
Yeah, add him to the list.
The problem for Nebraska would be if you have 7 really prominent high 3, 4-star, if there's a 5-star ever, is if you have those top 7 or 8 as really kind of appears as what the number was last year. And if Nebraska is getting 1 or 2 of those, that's an issue. If 1, maybe 2 of the top 7 or 8 get away, that's just the way it is. Like you were saying in college football now, they understand it. And other guys, some guys just, have some stars in their eyes and a wanderlust, and they want to go experience life at Notre Dame, life at Oregon, someplace else. And it's understandable. Right. Yeah. So but if they're going, if they're batting 75% or better, that's pretty good, and that's in large part to what they're doing now.
Well, and Bill, you mentioned the point just quickly here. We let off this conversation talking about the coaching clinic, how important it is to get guys like Tony Webb to Omaha because of the Christian Jones factor. Christian Jones could be a 5-star in the state of Nebraska, which would be the first one since, who is that tight end from Millard West like 20 years ago?
Chris Septak.
Septak, and then was Steinkühler a 5-star for Southwest?
Yeah.
Those are the two I think that you got in modern history that were 5-stars in the state of Nebraska. Christian Jones is a top 100 player, and it's not easy to be a 5-star from the recruiting services. Kind of depends on sometimes politics, which camps do you go hit, who do you notice, what offers do you get. It's more than just how talented are you. But if he plays his cards right this summer and impresses the right people this summer, that could be a guy that could be a 5-star by the time we're talking on this show in 6 months from now.
Yeah, he's certainly knocking on the door. And, we should spin this forward a little bit. And we spent time talking about what Nebraska's done in recruiting the state the last couple of years with Matt Rule. And we have mentioned Christian Jones, but Chase Lofton is another guy from Millard South as a tight end. And there's tight ends coming out of Nebraska at this level every year who is rising up the national chain with the interest that he's getting. He's the number 2 guy in the state by most of the recruiting services. And then the players after those top 2 are committed to Nebraska. You got Caden Vermas at Millard North, the safety, Tyson Terry, the incredible defensive tackle, 3-time state champion heavyweight wrestler, undefeated in his career on the mat, as of a couple of weeks ago, hoisting that third trophy. He's committed to Nebraska too, out of Omaha North. And then 4 or 5 others who have offers from Nebraska and are starting to get offers from programs around the country that are going to be huge targets for the Huskers from here moving into the spring and summer.
It's Mitch Sherman, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt. It's the Average Joe Sports Show. You can find us on Spotify and iTunes, the AJ Sports Pod. On Twitter, the AJ Sports Show. On YouTube, can watch it, can hear it, and like and follow. Let us know what you think. Guys, Nebraska baseball as we talk. Headed to the 9th, up 6-2 over Grand Canyon University. Drew Christo, ballyhooed talent out of Elkhorn, 6 innings, 4 hits, 1 earned. A good bounce back for him after a tough outing out of the bullpen in the opening weekend. Stone, a couple of bombs for Nebraska. So Grand Canyon, a team that has impressed early this season, and we're just a week in with some of their opponents and wins. And as a program, they're an infant, but 10 years of winning baseball in 11 seasons. So this is not a
not too tough to recruit. Not too tough to recruit to Grand Canyon University, I guess.
Well, it's always
step out the back door and start throwing out scholarship offers. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing: you talk about stepping out the back door. You'd think a place called Grand Canyon University would be somewhat near the Grand Canyon. It's like 5 hours away. Not
it's
even
overrated.
Close.
Vicinity is overrated. Let's get a thought though as we wind down the show. 1-2 the first weekend. Not awful. Will Bolt was a little more positive about it. Saw some things he liked. Rob Childress saw some things he liked. But yeah, they had leads in ball games to go 3-0. They end up 1-2.
Yeah, what I liked
would have been nice.
Yeah, 2-1 sure would have. You want to give your take first, Bill?
Well, I was impressed that they start the season strong with the win over Baylor, and it reminded me of unfortunately the COVID season. The first game, I think it was of the Will Bolt era, they beat Arizona State. And it's like this is starting off really, really well, and then COVID hits and the season is basically abandoned, right? And then they come off this season they start off with a win over a name program that's had a lot of success in Baylor, and then they're competitive and should have won at least one of the next 2 games against Texas Tech or Oklahoma. But to come out of the gate, to get a big win and be competitive. Now, I think we may be having this tournament conversation, a couple of months from now, and you're going to look back to the opening weekend. Oh, if they just knocked off Texas Tech or Oklahoma, that'll look better on the resume. But what they've got to find this year, and the challenge for Will Bolt is how do you replace Matthews and Anderson? The home run power that, they were the old school American League team where it was, get a couple of guys on and get the 3-run homer. And they just had so much confidence in them, and justifiably so. but this may be more of an older school National League team where it's manufacturing runs and finding consistent hitting just to get, to get it 2 or 3 and bunch some runs up in the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th, and then have Rob Childress do what he was brought here to do, and that is to build a pitching staff that is solid through 5, and then have 5 solid guys on the back end of a game that can close things out. That I think there's a lot on Rob Childress this year to develop that pitching staff, and Christo with a good outing. Clark's got to be effective, but I think everything is there. But replacing those bats in the lineup are critical, and the pitching staff, Rob Childress, and could be a pretty good team this year.
Yeah, Nebraska a year ago was top heavy as far as its talent goes, with Bryce Matthews and Max Anderson, and some starting pitching that was impressive, but the depth wasn't there for Nebraska to win on Sundays, for Nebraska to win the midweek games. I mean, those losses that Nebraska had against Omaha and some Summit League teams, Creighton, those just destroyed the Huskers tournament resume. Losing to Oklahoma and Texas Tech is one thing, and those would be great feathers in Nebraska's cap come Memorial Day if you could have won one of those games. And they did win one against Baylor, but if you could have won one more of those. But the thing that they have to avoid is those really bad losses that they had a year ago. And that's because of a lack of depth in the bullpen, a lack of depth as far as having a midweek starter, and then just having bats that can back up those 2 or 3 big boppers that they had a year ago. And I think this team, at least from the looks of it through 4 games, is constructed more like one that's a deeper, more spread out team in terms of its talent. You're not going to have, second round picks likely in the fashion that they did last year with that middle infield. But, we'll see when Christo gets into the season and if he's the guy out there midweek. But this looks like a case of Rob Childress taking a pitcher who was highly regarded out of high school, out of Elkhorn, and then struggled in his first 2 years on the mound for Nebraska in a way that I think most people didn't expect. Most people thought Drew Christo was going to come in, son of ex-Nebraska QB great Monty Christo, by the way, and
Monty,
yes, and just blow people away with his fastball in the low to mid 90s, and it hasn't been that at all. So if Childress has taken him and taught him a slider and taught him to pitch in a different way, then that's what Rob Childress has done. That's what he's made a living out of the last 30 years as a pitching guru. Brett Sears had a solid outing on the mound against Baylor. Went 5+ innings, 5 1/3, gave up 3 hits, 1 run. And then the thing that I liked in the lineup, the guy that I want to watch this year, Dylan Carey, he's going to be the big bat, hitting at the near the top of the order, probably driving in the most runs. But the guy that I loved watching, as I saw some highlights from those first 3 games, is Riley Silva.
Yes.
JUCO transfer, guy's just like lightning personified. I mean, you put him on base, he's running, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. He can lay down a bunt, he can hit it to the opposite field, he can play, I assume, a very dangerous center field or wherever they put him in the outfield. So he's the kind of player that reminds me of some of the guys that Dave Van Horn and Rob Childress had on their rosters in the early 2000s when they were making trips to Omaha and winning the Big 12 tournament every year. You just hated to play against them. Silva looks like that kind of a player.
Well, the best thing I can say about Silva, and I'll broadly speak about Husker Baseball here in just a second, but Silva, like who he is, was exemplified in one trip to the plate in Game 1 against Grand Canyon, where, we saw it in the first weekend. Dude's great at working counts. He's patient at the bat. He will get on base any way he can, whether it be by a walk, get hit by a pitch, getting a single, whatever he wants to do. But he laid down a bunt against Grand Canyon. Wasn't the best bunt in the world. He put a little too much on it, and it trickles right to the first baseman. He is booking it down the line. He eventually gets tagged out, but it didn't stop. He's diving at the first base bag, trying whatever he can to get underneath this tag and get on base, because he understands, and I'm sure the coaching staff has made it very clear to him, how valuable he is to have on base. You have a guy like that on base, The pitcher is going to be looking over his shoulder. What's Silva doing over there at first? Is he going to be taking second? Just having a guy on base like that, on first base, now the pitcher's got that in the back of his mind. This guy's going to try to swipe second. And once he's on second, I mean, it's not a difficult task. Anything to the outfield gets that dude in from home. So that is the kind of weapon that not only is very valuable to this team, it's also a weapon that I think Will Bolt and how he likes to play baseball, kind of small ball, very familiar with. I think Will Bolt will definitely get the best out of Silva as the year goes on. But as I look at this Husker baseball team as a whole, Mitch, just to kind of speak on some things you said, especially about the first weekend, like, would have been great to get Texas Tech, would have been great to get Oklahoma. But at the end of the day, your opening weekend and really your first couple weeks are not about building an NCAA tournament resume. Like, you look at, I think you can kind of compare it to basketball. Northwestern lost to Chicago State, who is like 300 plus in the net rankings right now. It's not hurting their chances because they did it in the first few weeks of the college basketball season. You're still learning who you are as a team. You're still getting better. That's where Nebraska baseball's at right now. They're building confidence. The coaching staff is learning some things about their team. The team's learning some things about themselves. Obviously, you need to get some wins. You need to avoid bad losses through the first couple of weeks. But it's about building confidence, learning how to win. And then once you get to the Big Ten slate, go take care of business against the teams you're supposed to beat in the Big Ten. And you have a couple crucial series against Maryland and Iowa and Indiana. You'll have those games coming up in the course of the Big Ten season. It's about taking care of business in the Big Ten and letting the cards fall as they may. Like, if you can take care of business against teams that you're expected to beat and you should beat, which Nebraska was unable to do last year, particularly in the midweek, I think the postseason considerations will take care of themselves. And all you need to do is get in. Doesn't matter. I mean, Husker fans, I'm sure, would love to host a regional, but just getting in and giving yourself a chance to compete is what really matters.
I will say, and I'm just looking at this now, one really quick observation I have, and how we may be looking back at that first weekend at some point. There's not a Power Five, or, I'm going to say, we're not going to call it Power Five anymore. There's not a major conference opponent on the schedule in the non-conference until Nebraska gets way into the season at the end of March. They play Kansas and Kansas State in home and homes this season, and that's it. That's it as far as the major conference opponent. So on one hand, your RPI or if they do NET rankings in baseball, I don't know, Ken Palm, does he do baseball? But that would have sure been nice to have won against Texas Tech or Oklahoma, because it's going to be interesting to see what it will take if it's going to be a down year for the Big Ten, an up year for the Big Ten in baseball when we get to starting to look at tournament resumes. But there's nothing else, at least in this early portion of the non-conference schedule, to really bolster your postseason resume. I know it's too early to be talking about that, but it was on my mind after those two ninth inning losses on opening weekend.
This series against Grand Canyon, I think, is a significant opportunity. You're on the road, and is it a really big game? Maybe not to most, but in baseball, yeah. That's a school. It's very similar to Liberty. I mean, it's a Christian institution with a lot of money. And, Liberty's put a lot of money and resources into all their athletic programs, and Grand Canyon has done the same thing over the last 10 years. And I kind of equate this a little bit to last year. Remember when they started the season at San Diego? Mm-hmm. And you're thinking, okay, you're going to probably go 3-1 there. They end up going 0-3-1. Or no, 0-3-1. They had that tie, right? And that was the tone setter.
Worse than a loss.
Yeah, that was not good. But so if they can do, they're off to a good start in the series. If they can win 3 of 4, that's not a bad thing, for an early season boost to a resume. And I think they would come back. They've got McNeese State in a couple of weeks when they open up the home season. But I think that would be 3-1 down there in Arizona would be really good. But real quick, going back to Mitch, what you said about those midweek losses, it seemed like their Sunday games in conference play were almost like had midweek approaches to them, like who's going to pitch, how long are they going to be able to go? In those midweek games, you kind of scrap it together and get some guys some at bats or some innings. And the Sunday conference games had that kind of feel to it. And those midweek losses were crushers last year. And Nebraska's number 5 preseason pick in the Big Ten, that's the dart throw. What are we going to do with this team now that Matthews and Anders? Let's put them in at 5. That's probably good enough, right? So I think that they're probably going to be better than that, and then in the Big Ten. But nobody knows without Anderson and Matthews how they're going to be rebuilt, and that's going to be Will Bolt and Rob Childress' job.
Needs to be rebuilt on the Hill midweek, and for sure for those major weekend series. And to wrap up, they've got more than enough guys that are going to be a pain in the ass for opposing pitchers and put stress on defenses, Will Bolt style.
This team, just to put a bow on this, Schmidt, I know you said you're going to. I want to put a bow on it. It feels like a team that is more constructed along the lines of a Will Bolt team. Like Will Bolt's teams in the past traditionally are not teams that are built on the long ball. Last year's team offensively was built on the long ball. This feels like a much more diverse offense, so it's going to have guys getting on base via walks, guys that are trying to go swipe second, get themselves into scoring position. That's how Will Bolt likes to coach his baseball teams, and I think this team is more built to that end. Like, I'm not guaranteeing it's going to be a better baseball team, but I think offensively it's closer to what Will Bolt is familiar with in his previous stops, his previous teams.
There you have it.
I'll bet Will Bolt, when he talks about Riley Silva, remembers some of the guys that he played with at Nebraska 20 years ago. And Silva, I noticed, is from Canada, as were Adam Stern and John Cole and a couple of others from that era that took Nebraska baseball to a level that it has never been matched. So I wonder if Will sees a little of those guys in Silva, and that's part of the reason that he's so excited to. I know you can tell he's excited to have him in the lineup the way that they're featuring him. So it'll be a good talking point later in the season when baseball is on center stage.
Well, it is a final 7-2, Nebraska over Grand Canyon. So there you go.
Super regional.
As the Huskers say.
World Series, baby.
Tone setter for Nebraska this weekend series. And we hope we set the tone for all your Husker fandom this weekend. Mitch, thanks. Bill, thanks. Elijah, thanks. Chris Schmidt, we'll talk to you next time on the Average Joe Sports Show, Spotify and iTunes for the podcast, and the YouTube channel, the AJ Sports Show. Subscribe and like. Tell a buddy, the AJ Sports Pod for Twitter. We'll talk to you next time.